This is Dan Schneider, and this is the Dan Schneider video interview. The man you see on your screen before you, his name is Michael Jason Allen. He's an independent filmmaker. He sent me his film a few weeks back. I reviewed it. It's a low-budget film, and we're going to talk about his process in making the film, his life, his career in acting and directing, and what he has coming up in the future. And that'll be occurring in just a short moment. And we are here now with Jason Allen. I want to talk about his film, The Coldest Kiss. A month or so ago, I did receive an email in one of my email inboxes, and since I have a popular website, I tend to get a lot of requests and solicitations. I seem to be on everyone's spam list for this, that, or the other thing, and I sometimes feel a little bit guilty because I'm only a person and I can't look at everything. But for some reason, the email that I received from Jason Allen was interesting enough, and I asked if I could see his film. I actually watched it on a private, I guess, YouTube channel. And so let me begin, Jason, by asking, the film The Coldest Kiss, what was the public relations strategy to get the film out there? Was it mainly just sending out emails to people like me and hoping that a few of us took notice?
Well, the first things I wanted to do was to get it into film festivals and then also get critics who would review the film. And once I got those together, hopefully, getting nominations or awards at the festivals and getting enough people that have seen it as far as reviewing the film, that would give me a little bit of clout to come up to some distribution companies to hopefully get distribution on, maybe some smaller cable TV channels that do independent films, or they could even release it, have a DVD release for it. So that was actually my goal in order, and it still is.
And let's talk a little bit about the world of an independent film, because I know you had just came from what was it, in Oklahoma, a little film festival. How do you you have the product done? Do you just solicit these film festivals? Do you know people in the industry and ask around? Do you fill out some long application process, and do you have to like send a $25 or a third entry fee, or how exactly does that work?
Well, it's kind of close to everything you said. What you do is when your film is ready, there's a website or a million websites you can go to that list all the film festivals in America, and then you look at them and you decide, hey, is my film going to be accepted into this festival? If you think it has a chance based on the criteria or the certain genre of films that the festival likes to cater to, you think, okay, I have a chance with this. And that's when, of course, you enter and you pay your entry fee, which is usually anywhere from about $30 to $80, depending on if you do it early or later, closer to the festival. They change their rates, kind of like a plane ticket. And so you really can't afford to enter every film festival in the world unless you have hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that with alone. So you got to pick and choose your festivals, which ones you think would be best for you. And so you do seek it out, and the way you enter them is there's a website called withoutabox.com, and it's for film festivals, and it has a list of all festivals that are certified as being festivals with that company or that website, and you enter through there. So you basically upload the information to your movie, and whatever festival you want to enter, you just send your already uploaded information to that festival along with either a digital screener, or you can mail in a physical DVD to them, and then of course you wait to see if you got selected.
And I know that I did reply to getting the email. How many critics did you send out to, and what was sort of like your response or rate? I mean, was I the only person that responded, or have other critics responded to you as well?
I sent out to about 18 or 19 of you on a website called Internet Film Critics Society. That's how I found you and some of the others. I got a response from 4 or 5 back, and I've already gotten a review from another reviewer from that website, in fact, in the last 2 days. And then 2 more have requested the film. So that's I guess four so far.
Okay. Well, I asked those questions just sort of as a public service, because I know over the years I do have a lot of young artists that do read my website, and they would probably find that information. Let's just give a general background. I want in a later section we'll go more into your life and career in the arts and acting and directing. But if you could give just say maybe a 2 or 3 minute summary of how you got into acting and then subsequently into directing. Did you star in as Nathan Detroit in a high school play? Was that your first role? Or how did you just become an actor? Was it something you always wanted to do?
I'm actually a lifelong musician. Music has always been my thing. And when I was younger, I remember I would actually coordinate between my brothers and sisters. There are four of us. And I would coordinate little plays in my mom and dad's bedroom. We'd wake them up on a Saturday morning and perform plays and use toilet paper and whatever else as props. So I was always into that. And I got a video camera when I was in high school. I bought with my own money from a job. And we'd go filming each other, faking movie scenes from 80s martial arts movies, like, old school movies. And that was about as far as it went. But then in 1999, I was 25 years old and I moved to Phoenix, Arizona. And I saw an ad, who wants to get into acting, answer the ad or whatever. And I did, and lo and behold, my first job was on a major picture by Columbia Pictures called What Planet Are You From? And it featured, I got to work on set with Greg Kinnear and John Goodman in a scene as an extra. And Annette Bening and Ben Kingsley was in the film, and it was a pretty cool thing. That was my first introduction to everything, and my first paycheck of $65 with the Columbia Pictures logo on it. So I was excited about that. And I just kept doing it, and after that, the agency I was with got me some regional commercials for cable channels and the WNBA and Cadillac and some things like that. And then I started wanting to do more movie stuff because I enjoyed the movie thing I did first, that first project. And of course, there's not a lot that comes through Arizona that way, so I had to do local films, independent films. And being on set, I realized that the independent film scene really isn't that professional. And me and a lot of other actors were complaining about the lack of story in these movies. It was usually just a bunch of blood, profanity, just nudity without meaning, And we thought, man, there's got to be more to it than this, and there really wasn't. So me and a friend of mine decided to start our own little production company and make our own films that have real value to them and substance. And that's how I started doing it. And I didn't really, trust anyone else to tell my stories that I wrote, so I just started directing myself. The way I learned how to do that is I was actually working on a commercial in LA for a perfume commercial I did, and the director, he was one of the Friends TV show cameramen, I believe, that was working on it. And I learned a lot because we actually used 35mm film on that. And I learned a lot about behind the scenes because I was always hanging out with the crew rather than the cast because I wanted to learn. And I think I kind of got my film education on set by experience and being curious. So I kind of stole other people's education through picking their brains, I guess.
Yeah, I know. When you mentioned about sort of the unprofessionalism, I know I've known a few people who did student films back when I lived in New York. I lived in the upper Midwest in the Twin Cities for about a dozen years. And I knew a fellow who did some small independent film roles. He actually got a role in a Coen Brothers movie, a minor role. And one of the things about your email, just the plot line that that was described, how it was described, it wasn't like zombie mutant cannibals or something like that. And not that you can't do that kind of thing with a sense of humor or whatnot, but it actually seemed to me that you were at least attempting something of a little bit more depth, a little bit more value, despite being a clearly low-budget project. But let's take a break here. When we get back, we'll get a little bit more in depth into your acting, your directing, before we touch upon The Coldest Kiss. And in this segment, in between segments, I'm going to give our viewers a chance to look at The Coldest Kiss trailer. And when we get back, we'll talk more with Jason.
Maddie married the wrong guy too soon. Now she and his nephew Thomas are playing a deadly game.
He's gonna try to kill us. You know he's got the curse on us now.
He would never go that far. I mean, I'm his nephew and you're his wife.
I need a reason!
It's because he can't lose. He can't stand the thought of losing.
I gave her a life. I gave her a life she wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yet something tells me I don't think she would thank you for that.
Come on, say it!
Are you thinking ahead? In time.
Did either of you even see this?
The worst part was, my own family didn't care that I didn't care.
You've never been given the chance to be you.
Finish this!
I will burn powder on you right now!
I feel like my father is the Dutch Schultz of this town.
Now he wants them both back and is willing to pay the price.
Shining bright above you.
A little old to be learning new tricks, don't you think?
What does it take to get the girl to smile?
Floyd doesn't have an airplane.
And Maddie is trying to find happiness anywhere she can.
How long did you have to put up with this?
I want to give you the happiness you deserve.
Can she and Thomas escape Floyd's grip and find their way to better times? A film written and directed by Michael Jason Allen, The Coldest Kiss.
I think they're gone, whoever it was.
And back with Jason Allen, and in this segment I want to talk more about Jason the person. We did touch a little bit in the last section, Jason, about how you got started in the business and whatnot. But let's go back to the beginning. Before we started the interview, you told me that you had grown up in Arkansas. So let's talk a little bit about that. Were you a creative child? You know, it sounds from what you had said earlier that you probably were. Were you one of these kids that was so rambunctious that the parents had to tie you down? Were you active in school in terms of being in school plays, that kind of thing? Let's talk about that.
Okay. Yeah, I grew up in a town of about 4,000 people in northeast Arkansas, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. And if you've ever seen the movie Footloose, that town that it's based off of is pretty much my town. You know, there's no rule on dancing, but I went to this pretty hardcore, you know, Pentecost-style church, and we weren't allowed to listen to current pop or rock music, and, you know, women couldn't cut their hair, wear makeup, or wear pants or anything like that. So it was very strict, you know, as far as our religion. But my parents are pretty laid back, so they weren't like strict parents. They were cool parents, you know. So it was kind of it was okay, you know. It wasn't like we were this little house on the prairie, you know, hardcore thing or anything. But it did make you want to, you know, listen to music and watch TV more than you're supposed to, you know, because back then in our church the TV was referred to as the window to hell. So if you had a TV, it was like a big deal. But yeah, it was pretty good. You know, I wasn't the crazy one of the kids. I was actually the laid back of us kids, at least of the three boys, and I was the middle one, and I didn't get as much trouble or do as many crazy things. I wasn't, you know, hyper and always, you know, in people's faces or anything like that. But in my mind, you know, I dreamt a lot. You know, I would think things and see things and imagine things and try to make things happen. You know, I was trying to run businesses when I was 6 years old. I would, you know, buy bicycles from local rummage sales or get them off of other kids real cheap and take them apart and then make this super bike and try to sell it and make money off of it. And I was like 6 or 7, you know. So, you know, I had this weird mind my whole life pretty much. But
well, you said that your sort of primary love artistically was music and not film or video or anything. So what kind of music did you listen to if rock and roll was from hell? Was it just the gospel stuff? Did you listen to old blues jazzmen or what?
No, actually, I tried to get the local pop station, the only one we could get to come in on the radio where we lived, and it happened to be like almost like a top 40. They kind of played some new wave type stuff too. So I was really big into, you know, bands like Thompson Twins and New Order, Information Society, and the new wave bands from back then, and Psychedelic Furs and stuff like that. And then as I got older, I rediscovered a band called Depeche Mode, and I started a band because I wanted to be like them, and that's where music started.
What instruments do you play?
I pretty much can play anything in the studio when I'm recording my own music. I'm not a whiz at anything. I can't just go on stage and jam with a band with any instrument. I'm not like that. But I can play the notes I need to play for my own music. But my main instrument is synthesizers.
Now, I know in The Coldest Kiss, the soundtrack is very much 1930s, 1940s. And in a sense, I was thinking, it reminded me very much of a Woody Allen kind of soundtrack from a lot of his films, the music from that era. Was this stuff that you listened to from your grandmother's old you know, records, or?
Very close, actually. More my grandfather, my dad's dad. He was actually a clarinet player in a big band in the 1930s. So I got a lot of that from him. The scene in the movie where I'm actually my character is clapping along to When the Saints Go Marching In. That's what he would do in real life when I was a kid. He would do that to that song, and he would clap along and get really into it. And so that scene was really inspired by him.
Yeah, I know one of the most interesting scenes from The Coldest Kiss, and the one that well, it's the jazz scene where there's the girl singing, and I remember in an email you said that you had actually written the song. It wasn't a period song. Talk a little bit about that song. How did you write that? Was that a song that you had written 10, 15 years ago, or did you write it specifically for the music, for the movie, rather?
No, I didn't write it for either one. Either way, that didn't happen. The last several albums we have, the records my band has put out, has been more, current contemporary, electro dance, pop stuff. And this past year, I decided that, I'm not making money off my music really, so why not just do something I really, really want to do and not worry about being commercial. And I wanted to make a full, authentic 80s sounding synthesizer-based album that sounded, very 80s. And that was one of the songs I made for that album about a year and a half ago. And I had this synthesizer that was made in '84 called the Emulator 2. And back then it cost about $10,000 and it runs off of floppy disks. And so I wanted to use that because a lot of my favorite bands used that back then to record big albums. Even Paul McCartney actually hired a person on his staff just to operate that one instrument alone in the studio. But so I made these songs, and that song was one of the oddball, the album, which is still going to be on there. But it sounded very 80s, almost like something you'd hear David Bowie trying to do, after Stardust or something, maybe around Let's Dance album or something like that. And so I thought, okay, it sounds, 80s, kind of like Simple Minds type thing. So it was a very 80s song, but then it had this swing beat to it. And I thought, well, I'm using this song as a feature song in the film, and I can't really, if I try to do this with another song, it's going to be expensive to license. So I just went ahead and 40s it out really, and I had some horn players come in and replace some of the horns on top of mine and make it sound a little more, older. And so that's how it came about. And I actually sing the original version of the song. It's on our record, but obviously, we can't have Melissa lip syncing to a guy.
Yeah, and I know, I forget the name of the actor. The actress that appears on screen isn't the actual singer, though. She was just lip syncing, right?
No, Melissa Farley was the actress who learned the song to lip sync, and the voice you're hearing on the movie is a girl named Kirsten Schneider. She's a local singer here in Phoenix, and she graciously recorded the song, and from out of nowhere, she didn't even know the song. She just came in and did it, so that was awesome.
Okay, let's talk then, since you mentioned in an earlier segment about how you got your entree into acting. You did have an earlier film that there is a trailer on your website, and I'll also insert that trailer in this interview for people to watch. Let's talk about how and why you wanted to get into directing. Can I assume that you were just not, as you said, satisfied with the local film scene, and you decided, well, I can do better? Is that how you came up with your first film?
That's exactly it, actually. I do have to mention, though, the Arizona film scene is really cool because a lot of people do a lot of things for free here. They help each other out. They do a lot of film work, and I've worked on some great projects. However, with that being said, the directors and most of the people here in this town, they have a different mindset. They have an independent mindset for the horror films and the niche films and no one really thought like me. It seemed like to me from the people I've worked with. And I'm sure there are people that do, but for my stories I was very close to when I wrote them. Creatively, I couldn't see anyone doing the stories the way I had planned. Otherwise, I'd be, telling them, hey, can you not do this, or can you do this? And then I'd be directing the director, just from being the writer or the actor. And I didn't really want to do that, so I just learned how to direct, from, being on set with, some of these people actually in town here that I've worked with. Some of the people I'm actually telling you their films, I didn't really, care about, the genres those ran, were actually, good at what they did and had skills. It's just that creatively we weren't on the same page.
Now, let's talk about that first film. Just give me a 2 or 3 minute summary. It looked from the trailer like it was a romantic comedy of some sort. That was made, a handful of years ago? Just give us a little background about that, your first effort.
Yep, it was the first film I wrote a script for, and the first film I directed and produced as well. That film was filmed in 2008, and it was released, it had a theatrical premiere in February 2009. And it is a bit of a romantic comedy, a little more of a drama, but there are some comedy bits in there. I wanted to come out with my first film like that. I wanted to make sure that it was exactly what I set out to do, and that was not to have the film based on, raunchy language, nudity, overly sexy scenes, blood. Of course, there's none of that in there, drug use and things like that. So I wanted to let people know, hey, I can tell a story here without having to, go to, shock value, and that was what that film was all about.
And well, what is the name of the film?
It's called References.
Yeah, and it's about a guy, I guess, who uses old girlfriends as references to try to woo a new girl, something like that.
Yeah, kind of, but he does it with a good heart. He lives in a small town, kind of like the one I grew up in, and but unlike me in real life, unlike Jesse, which is the character in References, he's pretty much dated every girl in town because everybody knows each other. Whereas in real life, I never got a date where I lived. I didn't even go to a high school dance or a prom. But he pretty much has dated every girl in town, and he has a reputation for being a playboy pretty much. Even though he doesn't do it on purpose, it just kind of happens that way. That the relationships don't really work out with him. But a new girl moves to town, and she's from the city, and she comes to help her aunt, who runs the mail store in town. So she's a big city girl coming to the small town, doesn't really know how things are around there or how people are. He meets her. They start dating. She realizes that he has an ex-girlfriend who happens to be really mean and vindictive, and she tries to make the new girl seem like he's a bad guy and that he's still with her, so she'll break up with him. And it kind of works for a little while, but he gets desperate, and she says, hearing these things around town, these people talking, they say that I'm just another one of your notches on your belt. He goes, no, it's really not like that. And he gets desperate, and off the top of his head, he throws out a plea and tells her, he says, hey, I have references. You can ask these girls about me, and I'll tell you I'm not a bad guy. And he gives her the names and phone numbers of his ex-girlfriends, and then she goes and investigates him, basically.
So let's talk about the life of an independent filmmaker. You've done now 2 films in 7 or 8 years, and you're working on a third one. American independent film basically got started with Orson Welles after he sort of got blacklisted out of Hollywood. John Cassavetes is another big name, a guy who struggles to finance his own films, a number of them quite great films. John Sayles is probably the biggest name American independent filmmaker that has had some success of the last 30 years. Were these some of the people that you modeled yourself on in terms of the art and what you wanted to do? And then let's talk about what you do to basically finance this films. Do you work as a house painter? Do you run your own business as a caterer? So let's talk about your vision in terms of the Welles, Cassavetes, Sayles as an independent filmmaker, and then what you do in your real life, your day job.
Sure. Yeah, I actually wasn't influenced by any of those, even though I think Welles was really good with the whole Mars invasion thing. I think it was him, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that was really cool to do something like that. It was kind of renegade, and I like that a lot. But no, I didn't think about that. Actually, the person I thought about the most as far as my directing style and not really giving in to things was Stanley Kubrick. He's my favorite director of all time, other than probably John Hughes, which John Hughes to me is more of my favorite writer, but he's a great director as well.
And so let's talk then about what you do in your day job. Do you work a 9-to-5 job or?
No, it's not 9 to 5. I work by appointment. I do health and fitness counseling for people at their homes or businesses.
Oh, okay, so you're someone who I guess is hired by people to. Are you a dietitian then? Or?
Not a dietitian, but I am a nutritionist. So there's a difference. Yeah, nutritionists can be certified. Dietitians, you have to actually have a minimum bachelor's degree from accredited college universities to be a dietitian, which I'm not.
Yeah, my mother-in-law is a dietitian, so I eat well.
No stuff then.
Well, let's end up this segment, and we'll get to the meat, the heart of the matter. We'll talk about The Coldest Kiss, which was the film that you had sent to me. We'll talk about its production. We'll talk a little bit about, or I'll talk a little bit about what I thought were the pros and cons, and I thought there were a few cons. I thought there were a lot of pros, especially given what you had said about its provenance, how it came together, and we'll do that in our next segment. And I am back now with Michael Jason Allen, the director. And I guess the best way that I would describe it is that it is a low-budget film, but it has a very, if not high budget, it has a very, compared to what its budget is, a very luxurious feel to it. It invokes, in a lot of ways for me, the style and the period that's seen in a movie like L.A. Confidential from the late 90s, which was a really great film. It's not a big budget film. There's not a lot of bang bang boom boom cop cop chases and whatnot, although it's set in that era in the Los Angeles area. So let's first talk about how this film came about. You mentioned that the first film that you did was sort of a romantic kind of comedy, and then this one is set 50, 60 years earlier. It's set in a place that you didn't grow up in. It's set in with kind of people you probably didn't experience. Where did the idea come from? How did you get it? Was it your idea alone? Where did the screenplay come from?
Actually, I'm a big, huge fan of the 1930s and 40s era. Of course, my grandparents are from that era. They're a lot older than they would have been for someone my age. Most people my age have grandparents that are, 85 years old, whereas my grandparents right now would both be over 100 if they were still alive. But yeah, I'm a big fan of that time because my favorite movies are from that era. My favorite actors are from that era. I'm a big George Raft fan, Cagney, Virginia Mayo, Astaire, and this is really my favorite time as far as film and movies go, other than the 80s. And I was originally in 2009 when I wrote that story. I was actually going to write a book as my first novel. I thought, I'm going to try to write a novel. I think it'd be kind of cool to get a book published. It'd be another thing that would be fun to do. My dad likes books too, so. But I started writing a book, and I realized as I was writing, I kept saying, and Thomas said this, and Maddie said this, and Floyd said this, and I thought this is turning into a screenplay. So it ended up becoming a screenplay. And as I started writing it, it was like, these days this story wouldn't work because, you have cell phones, you have internet, you have people that are real busy, very populated these days. There's not many, it just wouldn't work like that. Cars, don't break down and run out of gas just that easily like they used to. It was like a little different. And so I thought I had to put it in a time where it would be more innocent.
Apologies to our viewers and listeners. We had a little bit of technical problems there. That's what happens with Skype. Anyway, Jason, you were talking about the provenance of The Coldest Kiss and why you wanted to set it in the 30s and 40s era, if you'd continue.
Yeah, my favorite actors and films were made at that time. I'm a big fan of that era. And a lot of current movies, well, I wouldn't say current, but modern day movies that were made, especially in the 90s, are a lot of favorites of mine as well. I think that were done really well. For instance, Bugsy, Mobsters with Patrick Dempsey and Christian Slater, The Cotton Club from 1984 that's a big influence on me as far as the era goes. Billy Bathgate with Dustin Hoffman. Those are big films for me, and so I think they did really well portraying that time. And that's kind of why I said it at that time, because I thought that, with technology we have these days, this story would not work in today's time because you would have, obviously, things that you could find ways out of that problem that they had back then you may not have.
Now, the film is a color film. It sounds though, did you ever give a thought to maybe filming it in black and white to get that film noir feel?
No, I didn't. I know films that have done that. Some local short films have done that, and today with today's the way things are filmed digitally, even with filters and as much as you can possibly do, you can always tell it's been made that way. You can tell that someone tried to turn it into black and white. In fact, I think that film that won a bunch of Oscars in 2012, The Artist, I believe. Yeah, that was filmed. That was done really well, and they did a great job on that. They had a lot of money to work with, and they had all the time in the world and whatever else. And even at that, you could still tell it wasn't authentically made in 1920s. So even with them, they couldn't even get it to make it look like it was actually filmed then. So I'm definitely going to attempt that. And also, when we were filming some pre-work we did just to take a look at how things would go, it was just so beautiful. Everything was just so nice looking. It's like, why would I lose all this nice looking color for this?
Now, the film, I want to talk a little bit in a bit about the cinematography. Did you use any other kind of special effects in the film? I know there was the costuming and there was a lot of period use of cars and whatnot, but were there any kind of digital tricks that you used in the film, or was it just shot straight, basically?
Oh yeah, I didn't use any special effects other than some color correction, because the actual film doesn't look as good as what you see in the trailer of the film. It's shot in what's called a raw format, which means all the color is completely gone. Everything looks dead, empty. Nothing is separated, and so you have to do all that in post. And every film is like that. And so you do color correction. They've been doing that for decades. But that's really the only work I did. Even the gunshots and the lightning that you would see, the flashes and stuff, those were done on set by one of our production assistants who would do that literally with a strobe light as we were filming. So organic effects were already there. I can't think of any special effects we did afterwards. right now at all, other than the coloring.
So let's talk about how you got the film together. You have the screenplay, you write it out. What do you do next? Do you go and say, well, I need to find the actor? You go to find someone who's a sound person, the cinematographer.
You can't just make a list of order of things to do because everything depends on each other. It's like, you know, that old saying, you know, chicken without the egg, you know, which came first. And it's kind of the same thing. You can't get your cast until you know when your shoot dates are because they can't commit. And you can't get your shoot dates until you know if you got a cast because you can't get your shoot dates unless you got locations. So you got to get locations and make sure that those are okay to film at, or you know, get contracts for those. You can't get a crew until you've got the, you know, these things, because the crew want to know, hey, who's going to be in this? Is this worth my time? Or the other way around. It's like you kind of got to do a little bit of all of them all at the same time. So you're working at like 4, 5, 6, 7 different directions all at the same time without having anything locked in.
So how did you go about casting? There are 3 basically main characters. You play one of the 3 main characters. There are the 2 would-be lovers. There's the husband of the female character. Did you cast them first, or did you cast the background characters first? How did that work?
Everybody came at the same time. I did a local casting call with a character breakdown of everyone, including extras, day players if they wanted to come. But there are a couple of websites in town that really help out us actors, and they put these listings, and all the actors in town, you know, they're all on the same list, so everybody gets these emails and newsletters, so they hear about it. And they submit their information, and if it looks good, then I'll set them up an audition. And we take 2 full days, and you know, we used the city public library for this particular audition on this movie, and they'd get appointments. I don't like people coming in and doing a cattle call. I think that's not a good way to do things, and as an actor, I don't like doing that. So I gave everyone appointments, and they come in 15-minute increments, and they audition for the parts that I asked them to do. And then if something changes, I say, hey, can you read for this person too, because I might see something in them. But everybody auditioned at the same time. And I originally wasn't going to play Thomas, but I didn't feel that I could get the mix of what I wanted. You know, I had guys that had the look, but they couldn't, you know, read well. And then I had guys who could read well, but they looked like, you know, they just were either too young, or they were, you know, they looked like the guy who would be, you know, changing your oil or something, or another guy that would look like he was, you know, some, you know, cheeseball pickup artist. You know, I didn't want Thomas to be that way. So there's always something, and I've had Thomas in my head for about 5 years at this point. So I thought, you know, I'll just do it myself.
Now let's also talk about the period look of the film, because one of the things, the 2 most striking technical aspects for me, given the obvious financial limitations of the film, was the cinematography, which we'll get into, but the costuming, the period look. I mean, there are 2 or 3 cars, or maybe a few more, that are set in the period. They look gleaming new. The costuming was just really fantastic for the period. You don't have this money. I mean, I remember in an email I had asked you, did you know someone who was a costumer? Did you have someone who had a classic auto shop? How did you go about securing this stuff?
Well, I didn't know anyone at all before starting this film. Not any of the location owners, none of the car owners, none of the prop, no one. So how this happened, how you get these things, and this is how it's happened with all my films, is you literally go door to door to people after doing internet research, and you ask them, you say, hey, I'm filming a movie, and this is what it's about, and you know, would you want to be a part of it, and what would it take to get you to help out, you know? And that's pretty much how it happens. You know, the clothes happen because we have a shop here in Phoenix called Antique Sugar, and it's a costume shop. It's not really a costume, it's an actual clothing shop, and they only sell vintage clothing that's authentic. They sell pieces that are, you know, 100 years old for, you know, a lot of money, that's still put together, that may have been used in some show or something. And so that was a good place to start. And then for the cars, you're right, you go to car shows and you ask people, but I don't go to, you know, try to find the, you know, the most showroom car. It's just, I try to find the most authentic looking car, and if it happens to be showroom quality, then so be it. And you get people excited about it. And I have this personal thing where when I'm talking about things I like, I get really into it, like I'm doing now. I talk fast and I get all crazy about it. Yeah. And I think people see that, and they see that, you know, I'm serious, and that I want to try to make something happen with it. and they want to be a part of it too. Normal people in everyday life don't get a chance to do things like this very much. I mean, these guys that have these cars, they spend $100,000 or even more sometimes to get them to where they want to be, and the best they do sometimes is go to a car show in a parking lot at Home Depot on a weekend, and that's about as far as it goes for them. Whereas now they get their car on video forever, a good quality video, and then they also get the it put in its own period where it's surrounded by other things in its time, instead of 89 Trans Am in the background or a 2007 Escalade or something. It's actually in its own element, and I think that's pretty cool. As a car owner, I would go for that.
Yeah. Now, I want to get into some of the positives of the film. I do want to talk about the three things that I pointed out in my review that I thought were not up to par. And the one of them is the ending, which I thought was a bit long. I'm not going to go into what the ending is because I don't want to reveal any spoilers. Usually I don't do that because I look at a work of art, and if someone is going to read Dostoevsky, you need to talk about everything or whatnot. But I don't want to talk about the ending. I just thought it went on too long. The other two weak spots of the film, and I'll address this, and then we'll get talk a bit more positively. There's one scene where the lone secondary black character who works for the character of Maddie and her husband. There's some tension, and she pulls out a gun on her boss, the white man, and I found that to be a really big screenplay weakness, because if this was set in, I guess that it was a flashback, that's probably sometime in the early 40s, the woman would have been dead or whatnot. So that struck me as false. I just wanted to ask you, in a screenplay, did you have any regrets about that or any other scenes? If let's say if you could go back in the screenplay and adjust a scene here or there, would that have been one of them that you might have adjusted, or is there any other scene that you might have adjusted?
Yeah, for the black character you're talking about of Lula, I definitely would not change that. I don't feel that she would have been that way. I mean, I don't feel that there would have been a problem with that. It wasn't slavery times. I mean, black people were free and living normal at that time. I mean, of course, they couldn't use certain water fountains at certain locations and things like that. But ultimately, they were free to work and live. I mean, you had Billy Bojangles Robinson and Louis Armstrong, you mentioned earlier, and you had a lot of other artists back then who were becoming famous and starting to give, the blacks a little bit of notoriety in this country. And I don't think that they would have been hunted down with a lynch mob with a bunch of ropes and hoods and things like that. I don't think that would have happened. So to me, I'm fine with that. As far as the ending, I actually did cut down some of the ending from what it really was, and I've heard that from more than one person about that. And that's probably the only thing I would go back and possibly change. The reason for that is because originally when I started writing the film in 2009, the whole film took place in the dying scene. That's where the film started, was them dying, and then everything else in the movie was a flashback to them dying. So really the whole movie was going to be them dying before, so it would have been really long. But it was just about their moments together, because they really never got the chance to have private moments together that were legitimate. And as they're both dying together, and neither one of them were mortally wounded to where they would die in a second. They weren't shot in the head or anything like that. But so it would give them time to fall in love even more as they're close to death. And the fact that they I might have just spoiled the movie right there.
Well, and the final point that I thought was the weak point was the third lead character. The character's name is Floyd, and was played by Mario Guzman was his name. Yes. And I don't want to slag on the man. I'm sure he's a hardworking man and a hardworking actor. But I thought especially relative to the other two leads, and I thought you gave a good solid performance. It wasn't an Oscar-winning performance. I thought Laura Mestis, who played Maddie, had her moments. There was a few scenes that I thought were not strong. There were a few scenes that I thought she was much more believable. But the character of Floyd just to me rang a false note. I thought, number one, he didn't project as much menace. I thought his two henchmen were quite funny, and they had a good banter. I thought those were probably the two sort of comic relief in the film. But Floyd himself didn't seem menacing enough, and there was just something about the whole performance that when he was in contrast with the other characters, he seemed to stand out. I'm just wondering, was he your first choice for the role? Because the guy who plays his sort of Howard Hughes like buddy, the aviator buddy, and I forget the actor's name, he seemed I think his name was Howard, the character. He seemed to me to be a much more fluid actor. I'm just wondering, was Guzman the first choice?
We had some guys come in for Floyd, and we had a lot of great guys come in. 4 or 5 or 6 were in my top 1 or 2. It was really tough to decide. In fact, I had a hard time trying to get that cast. Rhett Crosby, the guy who played Howie, he did come in and audition for Floyd, and he did really, really great. The only thing is, he's a really, really nice guy, and sometimes it came through. And I just, I was like, man, this guy, he's so nice. It's like, even when he's trying to be, bad, it's kind of hard for him to really be bad to me anyway. There was another guy who's actually in the film who played his henchman, the clean cut guy with the black hair.
Yeah.
He went out for Floyd too. He was amazing. The only problem with him is he just wasn't as physically imposing as what I wanted Floyd to be. Because me and the guy who his name's Andrew DiCarlo, and he's actually starring in my next film, I think. But he was really, really great at what he did and everything. But I couldn't have us be the same, because we're about the same size, and I couldn't have us be in the same size, and I wanted him to be imposing on me as well. And the guy, Mario Guzman, who ended up getting it, he had this, he came in, the moment he sat down, I don't know what it was, he was reading the sides out in the lobby, and I think he kind of got an idea about Floyd right away. And he came in, as soon as he sat down, he was pompous right away, and I never knew this guy, and I thought, wow, is this guy really like this, or is he getting in character already? And pretty much that restaurant scene that you saw in the film, that's pretty much what he did in his audition, and that's what really sold me on Mario. And plus, he's 6'3", 235 pounds, and that combination, I think, is what did it for me to choose him.
And let's talk about Laura Messis, the female lead. I noticed in the credits there seemed to be a bevy of Mestises. Was her family involved in the production? Did they help finance it? What did they do? Because there seemed to be at least a half a dozen other Mestis mentions. How did you cast her, and in what capacity was her family involved?
Yeah, it's actually more than that. There's actually some her other family with the last name Gilpin. You'll see their name there. That was part of her family as well. But no, she actually wasn't the original choice for Maddie. In fact, she didn't get cast until like 2 or 3 weeks before we shot the movie. But she had nothing to do with production as far as that goes, no financing or anything like that. Her family was in it because we needed children for the Halloween trick-or-treating scene, and those were her kids in real life.
Oh, okay.
And her husband was also the dog trainer for the stage performance, the dog. And her husband's a dog trainer, has a dog training business here, so he trained the dogs, so you'll see his name in it, and he was an extra in the theater crowd. So that's why you see all those names, because they were extras in the film.
Okay, because she had, like I said, there was some weak moments I thought in her performance, but there was moments of a lot of genuineness. Let's talk about the cinematography now.
Yeah, can I just mention something else about Laura Mestis?
Yeah, sure.
This is her first film she ever did in her entire life of any kind, not even a short film.
Yeah.
So she comes from, I think, a theater background when she was in high school.
Okay.
And so she had done that before, and I think that's where her great speaking and narrations came from. Because those were, her narrations to me were top notch. But this is her very first acting job, doing anything in front of a camera like this in her entire life, and so that kind of is a little bit of why possibly some of those inconsistencies may be there.
Now let me that brings something up. We'll get to the cinematography in a minute. Let me just ask then, because I know in an email, and you said it was okay to talk about some of the finances of the film. You had said that you had financed the bulk of the film for about $5,000, a little less than $5,000, and then you paid some rights for a lot of the classic songs, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But I'm assuming, obviously, you're not doing unionized work, and you're not working with SAG and AFTRA, or what were some of the people actually union members who did the work, off the books kind of thing, or was it a totally local, people who, like Laura Messis, never had acted on film before?
No, at the time, I'm not sure of anyone that actually has their cards. There may have been 1 or 2 people who are eligible, but I don't think anyone's actually a member of the union yet at that time.
Okay.
So that was not a question for anything like that. I can't think. There were probably a couple of other people that didn't have screen experience, but a lot of them did.
Now you said because you do you're a musician. Do you regret using some money to buy rights for songs? Would you rather have sort of made sound-alike songs or similar songs, or do you think it enhances the film's reality to use songs? Or on a on the cost ratio versus what you got on the film, do you think that it was a wise choice to use the classic songs?
Yeah, I actually do. In fact, I want to give a little lesson here in copyrights and being able
Go ahead.
to do music like that. I actually have a little bit of history with that because in my music group I have paid to cover songs from famous artists. And what happens is you pay a publishing company, whoever has rights to that music, and you pay basically for however many copies you think you're going to sell, depending on what format it's on, whether it's digital or whether it's hard copy, mechanical licenses, and of course syncing licenses for film. And you basically give an idea of how many copies are going to be sold or whatever it is going to be, and then they base your price off of that. If it goes over that, then you got to pay extra to add on top of that. So what I do is I buy the least amount that I think I'm going to use, at least right away. And in case the movie doesn't go anywhere, then it wasn't expensive to get the music. But if it goes somewhere, then obviously I'm going to be paying a lot of money because there'll be more copies out there. But then at the same time, if there's more copies out there, then I'm making money too. So it really wasn't that expensive for me to do. Another secret to that is that some of the music I used is actually in public domain.
Yeah.
So some of the songs are in public domain where they're not copyrighted by or owned by any publishing company or any record label or any person other than the families who may have kept up with the 25-year increment copyrights, which a lot of them didn't, and some of these songs.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the public domain, and I think current copyright law stinks. I think most copyright should be the life of the artist plus maybe 20 years or the death of a spouse. But I'm actually going to probably do in the next year or so one or two shows about public domain films and about public domain and copyrights myself. I'm a big believer in it because I think people like you and a film like The Coldest Kiss are a great argument for why there should not be extended copyrights, especially for when the artist is long dead and the copyrights are being held by companies, because it promotes creativity, it helps young artists. The people who wrote a lot of these songs in the 30s and 40s are probably dead 50 years or whatnot. Why should their not that their grandchildren are doing, why should some executives at some music publishing company be? I mean, the reason the reason copyrights were established was to protect the rights of the individual artist, and then after their death to help foster the public domain, so that the people at large can take something and make something else of it. And I think you are I can. When I talk about this in later shows, I'll use you as the poster child for why public domain and copyright regulations need to be rewritten in this country and worldwide in favor of creativity and fostering the growth of the artist. But enough of my speechifying. Let's go back and talk about the cinematography of the film, because one of the things that struck me the most in The Coldest Kiss, and my wife too, who watched the film a few hours after I watched it, was saying, that's the thing that stands out the most about the film, is there are scenes that are well framed, that remind me of scenes, and I listed in my review about a half a dozen cinematographers of note that the framing is just well done. There are some of the scenes that are shot in light that even 25, 30 years ago would have been very expensive with old-fashioned equipment to shoot. And you mentioned Stanley Kubrick. You go back to Barry Lyndon. His famous candlelight scenes were revolutionary 40 years ago. And while I'm not saying all of the cinematography is perfect, there are scenes in your film that could not have been filmed on the budget you did even 10 years ago. So let's explain to me a bit about who the cinematographer was, how the shots were composed, how you worked with the cinematographer, pros and cons, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, our cinematographer's name is Steve Edward, and this is actually his first film he's ever made, at least that I know of, and that he's ever talked about or shown or has anything of. So it was kind of like an experiment for him, and for me it was about getting a guy who was hungry and a guy who had great equipment. He had a nice camera, which is the camera that they've made a lot of big films with, The Hobbit, Expendables, things like that. That they're making the film. I think Peter Jackson used it several times, but so that was really kind of how we got together on that. But what I do is when I write my scripts, I'll actually direct in my scripts, which is something odd that not a lot of people do. But I direct scenes in my script, and I'll direct how the actors are behaving and what the shots look like, and I'll put those in my script before we start to film. So kind of like my directorial, instructions are kind of there. And then when I get on set, I'll put on my glasses and I'll get behind the camera and I'll start framing shots. I'll start saying, hey, I need this to here. I want this to move from here to here. You got to stop here, or I want you to hold on till this line and then do this. And I don't want close-ups too close so it looks awkward and distorted. And I don't want things too, I just have a certain way how I like things look, and my camera guys just kind of do that, and they're good at that. So Steve did a great job of trying to get things to look what I had in my head and with my eyes. And we light things up, and I take my glasses off, get in front of the camera, and act my scene out, and it worked out.
Yeah, I know. When you look at the old films from the period that you mentioned, the 30s and 40s, they had the term called day for night shooting, where they would put on these filters, and and it always looks so fake, especially in old westerns, because you see, yeah, and you could see. You're not going to get shadows, and the trees aren't going to. I mean, yeah, you'll get a little bit of that with the moon, but you capture the night shots so well. You said that you have the directions within the actual screenplay. So let's talk about it. How many? When you're doing a film like this, how many takes did you do? I mean, were you doing basically just 1, 2, or 3 takes at maximum, or were you doing 20 takes? Because if it's digital, I would think there's not a lot of excess. But I mean, how as a director, how precise are you? Like Alfred Hitchcock said, actors are just cattle, or something to that effect. Other directors are sort of actor favorites. They try to call them on the set. There, are you someone who says it's got to be this way, or are you someone who says if an actor comes to you and says, well, Jason, maybe if I turn to the left at that moment when he says that, how responsive are you?
That's a good question. I'm gonna go back to real quick. You mentioned the lighting several times.
Yeah, go ahead.
Actually was a gaffer on this project. I did the lighting on this project myself for every shot. And you mentioned the day for night shots. We didn't do any day for night. What we did is, I'm a huge, to me lighting is a big deal, and I'm into the 80s lighting, how they did in the 80s films with the, the smoky shadows with the blinds and stuff like that. I'm really into that, and so I've learned to light that way. I'm a cinematographer myself, actually. So when I'm not shooting my own movies, I'm actually doing other people's work. And so the lighting was actually done. Those night shots were legitimate. They were lit at night and at nighttime, so there was none of that going on. As far as the amount of takes and things like that, I pretty much just go by what feels good. And characteristics, mannerisms, quirks, and things like that. The actors have a lot of freedom. I don't tell them how to twitch their eye, or how to tilt their head or whatever. I'll let them go with that, and if it's good, awesome. Let them be them. But if it's bad, I'll say something if it's bad. But if it's not, it's like, hey, it works. But as far as take numbers, sometimes we'll do 1 take, sometimes we'll do 15 if we have to because of technical problems. The average amount is usually about 3 to 4 for most scenes. The big ending in the movie, that big long ending you're talking about, that was all done in 1 continual take. And that was it. We didn't even do a second one. We were so cold. Laura was actually sick with bronchitis. We had all been awake from Friday, that was Sunday night, for about 3 days with about 2 hours total sleep. Literally, we slept like 30 minutes one night and like 1 hour the next day. And we were freezing at nighttime. It was like 4 or 5 in the morning. We did that one scene at the end. And we just really didn't know what we were doing. My mind wasn't even that. And that's the one scene of the movie where I don't even remember what I did. When I'm watching myself in that scene, I don't even remember acting that way or saying those lines, So it was after that one scene I said, you know what, I was pretty miserable, she was pretty miserable, it had to come out good because we were really miserable, so I just left it.
Well, let's wrap up this segment, and when we get back we'll talk a little bit more about the marketing of the film and going around to film festivals, how you try to get things distributed, that sort of thing. I do want to mention one thing though, the technical positives of the film. I mentioned about creativity and the need to spur. as a filmmaker, I'd mentioned Orson Welles, and if you look online, and this just as an independent filmmaker, if you want to get ideas about how to do a low budget film, there was an Orson Welles film made in the 1960s called Falstaff. Falstaff, based upon the character of John Falstaff, who appears in about 4 or 5 Shakespeare plays. And the character of Falstaff is not a particularly interesting character. He's a secondary character. What Orson Welles did that was brilliant and makes it a really great film, and you can look on my own website for my review of the film, is he takes the Falstaff characters from those 5 plays, takes all of those incidents, adds a little bit into it, and makes a very interesting character. And it's a film that was probably, I would guess, in the 1960s for a major director, probably filmed for maybe only a couple of $100,000, which is still far beyond what you did. But if you want to look at someone who takes ideas and weaves them into something totally new, that's a film that I would say any independent filmmaker, yourself included, should watch. And it's available on YouTube, or it was a few months ago, the last time I looked. It's available on YouTube if you just type in Falstaff Orson Welles. It's about 2 hours long, and I would recommend that any young filmmaker, independent filmmaker, would watch that. And your film, like I said, has a number of these good technical qualities, and it's why I'm doing this interview with you, so that other young filmmakers can look at these kinds of films and say, we don't have to make just, zombie mutants from Planet X or lesbian vampires from, Bermuda or something. But anyway, when we get back, we will talk about how you went about distributing the film and getting it out there. So we'll do that in a moment. And I am back talking with Michael Jason Allen. Now, Jason, I wanted to talk a bit about when the film is done. So I know on your website now, and before we started the interview, you mentioned that you are ready to start gearing up for your next film. But you just came back a week or two ago from a film festival. We talked earlier about how you applied, not. How do you go about getting this film out there? I know the DVD available on your production site's website, and we'll have that listed below this video where people can find your production company and the film. So what's next? How are you going to market Coldest Kiss more?
Well, as I said earlier, what I'm going to do is keep doing festivals. As the festivals build up, hopefully we get nominations, and even more, hopefully we get awards. And as those come along, give us reason to, give us things to say, hey, this film is something you should, check out. Because the credentials it's getting now, it's building, and that goes along also with critics' reviews, and in case someone says something great, and that helps out as well. Like I said, my ultimate goal is to get it distributed from a distribution company that allows me to keep my film, but at the same time is willing to put it out there for international sales on a bigger platform where they have a bigger audience than I do to be able to sell this to, and they can put it on like I said, smaller cable channels throughout the world, and different independent channels that feature films like this.
Yeah, I know. Actually, just this past week, I had done a internet radio show about a dozen years ago, and if you look on my own my YouTube channel, it's called the Omniverse Show. I did a show called Omniverse #7, and there was an independent director named Josh Becker who was with an actor named George Dickerson, and there was a lot of information that he gave about the making of independent films. So if you ever get in, you might want to also listen to that show too, because it's only been a dozen years, so things might not have changed that much. But he gives some good advice on how to get his stuff out there into independent channels, the Sundance Channel, that kind of thing.
Will do, for sure.
But you mentioned internationally, so. Have you applied for film festivals outside of the U.S. then? I mean, other than Canada? I mean, have you gone to Europe or applied to European festivals?
Not yet, but there is one in England I want to do. It's the Leeds Film Festival. I'd like to do that one. They like films kind of like ours, and like I said, you got to watch what festivals you send to, because they're going to take your entry fee money, even knowing that you're not going to get selected the moment you send it, or even before you send it. Like if I sent my movie to Cannes or Sundance, or I sent it to Tribeca, it's 100% guaranteed I'm going to get rejected because I don't have a name attached to the film. Yeah. So that's automatically out. But they're going to take entry fee money anyway and keep it. So that's where, as a filmmaker, you got to be smart and decide, hey, do I have a chance with this realistically? That's where you decide where to allocate your money to for festivals, and that's why you got to be careful. Another thing is certain festivals, they cater to short films. So they don't like feature films because it takes up too much of their time and they can't show as many. So that's not good sometimes. So you got to really pick and choose which ones will work for you. And you can't just enter any festival anytime you want to. They have certain times where you can enter. And then usually about 3 to 6 months after you enter is when you find out if you're going to be in the festival or when it occurs. So it's kind of a long process. I could enter a festival today and the festival wouldn't occur until September or October.
So what... You had the latest festival was somewhere in Oklahoma. What was the name of that festival?
It was in Duncan, Oklahoma, which is about an hour and 15 minutes south of Oklahoma City, and it's called the Trail Dance Film Festival. It's actually a pretty good one. It's listed as one of the top 25 favorite festivals in America by I don't know who votes on it, if it's film festivals or if it's filmmakers, but it's in Filmmaker or Film Festival magazine or Film Festival, whatever it is. But they're listed on a lot of things. They're at the top of the list. In fact, I think they actually won the first spot for Film Festival worth the entry fee twice. But it's a really cool festival, and they had some big names there this year. We got nominated for Best Director, Best Actor, and Best Feature Film. And we went up against some films that had big names in them. There were some films we beat out for nominations that had actors like Juliette Lewis, Misha Barton, Willie Nelson, Alan Ruck from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He played Cameron. Eric Roberts, Andy Dick, lots of people with names, and we beat out them for nominations in their films. So that was pretty cool.
So you get there at the festival. I assume there's this particular time that your film shows. Are there 50 or 100 people there? Do you do a question and answer before or after the film? Did you go alone? Did you go with a couple of the other actors? How does that work?
Yeah, actually, they screen. I think they had 4 different screens this time, and people can, with tickets or passes, they get a schedule of the films that are playing and where they're playing at, and you can just go to whatever film you want to watch at any screen at any time. And it depends on how popular the film is, or how much buzz it's getting, or how many friends or family they can get to show up, or whatever it might be. And that's about what your population of the crowd will be at each particular movie. We did go there to the festival we attended, and it was really great. Me and Rhett Crosby, the guy who played Howie in the film, and also Gucci Mercer, who had a small part in the film, but she did a lot of behind-the-scenes work, as you'll know by looking at the credits. She did, production assistant. She was costuming, script supervisor, makeup. She did all the period makeup for all the actors and actresses. So yeah, we had a good time.
Well, let's end this segment, and we'll watch a trailer from your first film, References. And when we get back, We'll talk about what's coming up with your next coming film, any future plans beyond that, and we'll end the interview with giving you some closing remarks, and we'll do that in just a moment.
I hate you!
Hi, I'm Jesse.
Marla.
So what seems to be the problem?
My question is, if he's such a great guy, why haven't any of these relationships lasted? There's just something bothering me about this whole thing. Jesse, I'm not sure this is such a good idea anymore. It seems like you've been with every girl in Northlake, and everyone knows it but me.
Marla, you are special to me, and listen, I've never known anyone in town like you, and I'm not what you think I am.
Jesse gave you my name as a girlfriend reference.
What does that mean exactly?
You're either extremely confident or really desperate.
I wasn't going to tell you anything, but then I felt so bad, because you're so nice, and you're taking care of your sweet Aunt Helen. I didn't want you to have to deal with anything else.
No, just don't worry about me, honey.
Marla, my whole life I've had a picture in my head of the perfect girl for me, and none of them seemed to fit. Until that day I came in the mail store, and I saw you. That's when I saw that picture.
Every time I see him around, I hear a sound.
You know what? I don't care what anyone else says about me and Jesse. I'm his girl and always will be.
But this is for your own good.
What? What the hell? What the hell is going on?
What kind of girl would want to be with a guy who gives references of girls from failed relationships?
You're right, we don't belong together.
Just come to me, lay your weary head to rest.
It's been 8 months. We've both moved on.
And I am back with Michael Jason Allen, and we're going to wrap up this interview with him. We've talked about the film that he had sent to me, The Coldest Kiss, to watch and review. And on that website just a few days ago, I noticed that you have another forthcoming film. So let's look, instead of looking backwards towards what you did in the past, let's look about what's coming up. So let's first talk about your coming film. What is it about? When do you hope to start casting and shooting and releasing that?
Well, actually, we're in pre-production right now. We just started pre-production about a week ago. And so we're going to be shooting that this May and June. And casting is a little bit different than any casting I've done before. I'm not doing a casting call per se. I'm actually trying to get a hold of people I know personally and that I have in mind for these characters and see if they want to do it first before I start doing casting. And then there are other characters, supporting characters and character roles that I'll probably do auditions for.
Are you going to be using the same production crews, the sound and the cinematography people from the Coldest Kiss, or are you going to be doing something else differently?
I'll probably be using a different crew because it's a different time, you know, a different kind of look, and I'm using a different format, I think, of media. And there's a certain kind of look I want, and you know, there are some people I've worked with that, you know, they're very much into the '80s films, the John Hughes look that I like, and I think that would be a great way to go for this particular film. And I also think some of the people I worked with before that were really great to work with are actually busy making money now, so they might want to do it.
Yeah. So now let's play crystal ball. You're an independent filmmaker. If you could have, I mean, obviously you'd love to have a film that's a quality film that becomes a blockbuster, but let's try to stay realistic. 5 or 10 years from now, let's say you've made another 2 or 3 films. What kind of stories do you want to tell? Where do you hope to be? You know, obviously, again, you'd want to be able to make money and be able to actually make money off of your art. But what is your idea going forward?
Well, this film is set in the 1980s, and it's the one I'm working on now called Stealing Sunrise, and it's going to be basically your basic, 80s movie. Everything about 80s is represented in this movie. It's going to be as period as The Coldest Kiss, or probably more. But later on down the road, what I really want to do is I want to make a really awesome, epic Civil War movie. So that's big for me. You actually wrote in your review, you mentioned how that you feel that I have, I guess you could say, more attributes on the directing, writing side than I would be on the acting side, which I agree with. And I feel that if anything happened in my career, I feel that it would be on that side. And so I would really like to be able to make a film that would be along the lines of something that you would see a cross between Stanley Kubrick and Clint Eastwood might make. But that's what I wrote. I'd really like to do. It's hard to get those kinds of films these days with budgets, because they're not considered sure things.
So. Well, where would you shoot your Civil War film? Would you have to go down to the South, or would you do it in Arizona?
Go to the South. Yeah, I'd pretty much go back to where I grew up at, because they had a lot of real battles there in that area, and things would be so much more authentic looking and feeling doing it there. Yeah.
Okay, let me just give you a couple of minutes then to say whatever you want to, some closing remarks, and then I'll wrap things up for the interview.
Yeah, I just want everyone to know that The Coldest Kiss is a film that you can watch with anyone at any age, pretty much, if you can, as far as language goes, and not too much violence, but and things like that. I just want people also, if there's any independent filmmakers out there, you don't have to do what's these festivals really want you to. People think that you have to do something that just requires a bunch of shoot 'em up, blood and guts everywhere and f-bombs everywhere. Write a real story. Think about writing a real story and then make it into a script, which happened by accident for me in The Coldest Kiss. I didn't intend to write a script, but it turned out that way. And then people like Dan asked to talk to you about it.
Well, thank you, Jason, and I'm going to end this interview with just telling people what's going to come up in my next interview in about a week or so. I'm going to actually be talking with a paleontologist who I actually found online debating about Triceratops and Torosaurus. So
is his name Ross Geller?
No. No, but his name is Nick Longrich, and it's going to be an interesting little switch-up. So, again, thank you, Jason, and good luck with The Coldest Kiss.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it.
All right. Goodbye.